The subcommittee will come to order, and good morning to everyone. Pursuant to notice, we are here this morning, to mark up Title I of H.R. 1415, the End Tropical Diseases Act. Title I is in the jurisdiction of our Committee on Foreign Affairs, whereas Title II is in the Energy and Commerce Committee, so that will have to be done by them, and we are pushing hard for that to happen. I note that the measure is unopposed and no amendments and have been put forward. I also note that the subcommittee will reconvene following this markup for a hearing and other events that have been scheduled. Upon consultation with Ranking Member Bass and pursuant to yesterday's notice, we intend to consider this bill in an expedited manner. All members have a copy of H.R. 1415 before them. After we have concluded our expedited consideration, I would be glad to recognize any member, including myself and the ranking member, or Dr. Barra, if he serves. I think you're serving in that position right now. For any statements they might have on the issue. All members are given leave to insert written remarks into the record if they so choose. Seeing again that we have a reporting quorum present, without objection to H.R. 1415, the End Tropical Diseases Act, Title I only, is considered as read. The chair moves that it be adopted. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. In the opinion of the chair, the item is adopted. Without objection, the measure is reported favorably to the full committee, and the staff is directed to make any technical and conforming changes. I would just say a few opening comments on this legislation, and we'll put in a much fuller statement for the record. Neglected tropical disease, and let me just say for the record too, this is the second Congress that we're trying to get this legislation passed. We got it out of full committee last year. Regrettably, it stalled in the Energy and Commerce Committee, but my hope is that that will not be the case this year. Neglected tropical diseases are a group of 17 parasitic and bacterial diseases which blind, thank you, Jim, disable, disfigure, and sometimes kill victims from among the more than 1 billion of the world's poorest people, trapping the most marginalized communities into a cycle of poverty. These diseases can keep children from attending school and their parents from working and cause excessive bleeding by mothers during birth and results often in low birth weight babies. NTDs therefore constitute a significant hurdle to achieving economic growth and dilute the impact of foreign assistance programs. While tropical diseases primarily affect communities in developing countries, outbreaks have been reported in the United States and other developing countries in recent years, such as the West Nile virus, dengue fever, and most recently, Zika. The most common NTDs can be controlled and eliminated. However, there is still much work to be done to prepare for currently unknown diseases that may appear on the international scene and to reach the World Health Organization's control and elimination goals by 2020. To achieve these goals, heightened support is needed now from both new and longstanding partners. H.R. 1415 supports the control and elimination of NTDs in the United States by, among other things, supporting USAID's NTD program to better integrate NTD control and elimination efforts with other development issues such as HIV/AIDS, malaria, water and sanitation, and education, and conduct research and development for improved drugs, diagnostics, and vaccines to control or to eliminate STDs. Directing the U.S. government to advocate for increased efforts to address NTDs among international institutions such as the UN, WHO, and the World Bank. Calling for the Department of Health and Human Services to submit a report on NTDs in the U.S. to better understand the epidemiology, impact, and appropriate funding needed to address NTDs domestically, encouraging the creation of one or more NTD centers of excellence. I would note parenthetically that in the year 2000, I authored legislation on the issue of autism, and the mainstay of the legislation was a series of those centers of excellence. And those centers of excellence and the work that now CDC and NIH does on autism has resulted in a major push to try to help those with autism discover root causes and to promote early childhood intervention, and it came out of those centers of excellence. So this could be a game changer, we think, in a game that has to be changed for the sake of the poor and marginalized communities. It also would establish a panel on intestinal worm infections to evaluate and make recommendations regarding potential solutions to worm infections, which impact more than 1 billion people worldwide, including 600 million school-age children. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson told the Foreign Affairs Committee full committee yesterday that the administration was committed to remaining a leader in areas including global health. They can demonstrate that commitment by continuing to support the work done by CDC and the National Institutes of Health and the U.S. Agency for International Development. And I do believe that as we move forward on that budget, those gaping cuts will not materialize, and I know I and others will work hard to ensure that we do more in some cases rather than less. It is long past time for Congress to affirm this work, particularly in the area of NTDs. And I want to thank Ranking Member Bass, Congressman Dan Donovan, Gregory Meeks, Sanford Bishop, and Eleanor Holmes Norton for joining us as early co-sponsors of this legislation. And I'd like to yield to Dr. Barra if he has any comments he'd like to make.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep my comments brief, but I think this is an important piece of legislation. I look at this as a physician who has worked overseas, and we don't always think about neglected tropical diseases. The folks sitting around the table at home may not be talking about schistosomiasis or trachoma, but the truth is these are diseases that affect millions around the world. And the reason why investing in this research, looking for cures are so important, it's a reflection of not only our values as a nation to engage with our allies and other like-valued countries around the world to relieve suffering. We also know that the world is much more interconnected today. Diseases that emerged, much like Ebola a few years ago or Zika, in one part of the world certainly move and spread. So we can't just think about how we address health and disease here in the United States. We've also got to go where those diseases are and look for those discoveries. So, it is my hope that this moves quickly through the full committee and to the floor of the House. And again, it is a reflection of who we are as a nation and our values to be concerned and focus on that suffering around the world. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take a moment to thank you for your leadership in this area. I mean, global health has become a great interest of mine since I got here 2 years ago. We deal daily with the preventable diseases throughout the world that, as Dr. Barra says, we're a compassionate leading nation. We outsource our abilities to help others, as you also mentioned, because of the ability for people to travel. Many diseases that may not affect our nation now because people traveling to our country affect us as well. But through our compassion and leadership, this nation should you do everything it can to relieve other countries of diseases that are preventable and non-existent in our own country. You have been a leader in this area for so many, many years. I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my colleagues for supporting this legislation.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Suarez?
Associate my remarks with everything that's been said already, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Garrett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, I think budget hawks might look at this and wonder what the purview was of this organization as it relates to this action. I would answer them by saying that it's difficult, if not impossible, to separate global health from American health. That in a world with intercontinental travel, in a world that shrinks by the day, conceptually, the idea to combat these NTDs abroad rather than at home might parallel the hawkish line that some take in the war on terror. I would associate my remarks with the gamut of individuals on this committee and submit that while it's not just being a good neighbor, it's also being a good tenant in our own home, and this is good policy at every level. Thank you.
Mr. Garrett, thank you so very much. Thanks to all the members of the subcommittee for their support and their excellent remarks. Without further ado, the markup is concluded, and we will now move to the hearing that was scheduled pursuant to notice.